as America's Dad. They still view him in the ads with Jell-O, and then they, even going one step further than that, people make the argument now that the allegations may not have come forward but for his attempt to possibly purchase NBC, which is like a realistic argument that people keep throwing out as the basis for it. But at the end of the day, he came to the table with unclean hands, and he was exposed for what he is over the course of time. It wasn't one or two allegations, and it wasn't one or two instances many years ago. So when you show up with unclean hands, you can't expect to just sit at the table and eat forever.
Yeah, it's. I'm sorry, Chief. I was thinking, if I had a crystal ball, some years ago, and 20 years ago, and someone asked me to gaze into a crystal ball, and in that crystal ball there was Bill Cosby and Donald Trump, and the genie says, okay, in this crystal ball, in 20 years, one of these people will be in prison, and one of these people will be president. I would have had that thing wrong all the way. I'd have been like, man, Bill Cosby will be the first black president. And Donald Trump going to jail. And here, I mean, it just seems like, you hear Kavanaugh talking about the Twilight Zone. There's part of it that seems like, the Twilight Zone here. And again, not trying to move any of this away from, I think all of us who grew up watching those shows are watching him, Chief, how much we love comedy. This is like one of the only clean comedians.
Right,
I mean, everything about him was clean, but it just shows, people's backstory and their life and things that you just never know about folks. And by all means, he's guilty, and you got to do the crime, you do the time. But then it does raise questions about, well, how if they're going to be dealing with folks this way, then they need to be dealt with the same way across the board. So if they're going to look at him in one way, I saw, you're seeing stories pop up, all over the place, of different things. Something in May, there was a story of an older white gentleman, like almost 79 or 80 years old, almost the same age, who got like some 90 days for assaulting a 5-year-old kid. He pleaded no contest and got 90 days at home, and he's off and free. So where is the equal treatment across the board? These kind of things, and those are the questions that I think that are going to come up. By no means am I, supporting or condoning what Cosby did. But
I think that's a really important point, because I'm hearing the argument constantly that there's no caveat that you can make with respect to it, but there really is a caveat you can make. You can condemn the actions of Cosby in its strongest force while still pointing out the fact that disparities within the system exist. So for folks who are saying, well, let's just focus on Cosby, we don't need to talk about anything further, we do need to talk about something further, because there are other victims out there that are afraid to speak, and the disparate treatment that's involved. Again, nobody's saying that Bill Cosby should have been acquitted at this point. Everybody's saying that the same scrutiny needs to be applied across the board, and that's a fair observation in my opinion.
I agree, and one of the other things that I wanted to ask you is, in your background with dealing with these types of cases, did you often run into situations where allegations were made against someone, let's say like a department head or someone that had a little bit of rank, and how did you all go about abating that allegation?
Sure. I've actually seen it across the board a couple times. When I was prosecuting in New York, we had individuals recant allegations of sexual abuse for no other reason. In one instance, we were able to discover that someone who alleged it was actually lying about the whole incident. It was recorded on video.
Wow.
But at the same time, those are, in my opinion, fewer and further between. The reason why generally that doesn't end up being the case, and victims, in my opinion, in this particular instance, tend to come forward and are honest about these types of instances is because there's so much guilt, shame associated with it. It's probably the most difficult thing that someone can go and report to someone else, because it's truly a crime against their body. Nothing else,
right?
No other crime can compare in terms of the gravity of the actual violation in and of itself. Anyone can be the victim of a theft or a financial crime or whatever the case may be. But when it comes to sexual crimes, particularly since sex is such a taboo within society at large, it's extremely difficult. So it's fewer and further between in most of those instances. And again, this is the one crime that we tend to look at where the victim is on trial versus the abuser.
Wow. And that's very powerful. And did you find that once you got into looking into these matters that the victim was stigmatized? You know how word gets out. Jane Doe, did you hear, girl? Jane Doe filed against Mr. Big. Did you find that kind of stuff going on as well?
Absolutely. And many of the instances, the thing that the justice system really never accounts for, and in my opinion, one of the great flaws of our justice system is that while we say we protect victims, the fact of the matter is that, let's say, I'll use your example, Jane Doe has accused John Doe of sexual abuse. Well, that's fine. Jane Doe might end up having a protection order against John Doe. That doesn't mean John Doe's friends aren't going to know what happened, that his friends or family members aren't going to go make social media posts about what happened, label Jane Doe a whore, whatever the other terms are that are being used to describe her, totally try to discredit her and destroy her reputation simply to prove the point that whoever it is protecting was not guilty of that, because her sexual improprieties in the past mean that she consented to everything at all times, it's totally an absurd notion, but it's extremely common. And it seems like the defense that's almost always used in these instances. So even if we look today at what's happened with Dr. Ford, she's come forward with these allegations. You're hearing tons of criticism from those who are in support of Judge Kavanaugh's nomination, questioning her truthfulness, questioning her memory, saying she doesn't remember anything, despite the fact that she reported an incident similar to her therapist 4 or 5 years ago, before he was even up for the Supreme Court. And so, it's really come to a point now where people are they're going really far below the belt. And unfortunately, she is a victim of crime. Now you can see in large part the reasons why she was never intending on coming forward and reporting this in the first place.
Wow. Boy. Well, I think, we haven't even really scratched the surface of this whole discussion. But let me ask you one thing before we go to break. Do you think the Me Too movement motivated the Cosby verdict, or the whole zeal to get this thing in front of a jury? Or do you think it was an overzealous prosecutor? What do you think made this thing move?
This was, I think, 100% motivated by the culture that we live in right now, which is, for once, in a positive way, doing something and taking a stand against sexual abuse. If we look at even the way the confirmation hearings proceeded with Anita Hill versus the way that Dr. Ford's being treated, if this was, 1990, 1991, 92,
sure,
these allegations may not even held any weight. They might have just dismissed her, and that's Democrats as well, much the same way they did Professor. And now we're in a situation and in a society at large which has condemned this in large part because of the Me Too movement and because of the pervasiveness of social media across the world.
Sure. Wow. Well, we certainly appreciate that. And of course, this has been a great discussion. And so after the break, we kind of wanted to really delve into the plight of Judge Kavanaugh, whose confirmation hearing is delayed right now. And, there's all kinds of back and forth going on. The president's been weighing in all day. He's been making all kinds of allegations and assertions against all the accusers, everyone that's come out. Now he is saying that he doesn't believe them, and just really victim bashing, if you will. I know these are all allegations, and everyone deserves to be heard when allegations are made against you. But I just found this to be very fascinating and disappointing at the same time. And of course, the judge says that he wants a fair process, and Dr. Ford wants to be heard. How will it end? Who knows? Well, let's think about it, and we'll be right back. You're listening to Straight No Chaser. We'll be right back.
DWI, even at first, it's pretty harsh. You don't realize, you know?
Up to 90 days in jail.
Can't be there for my family.
I'm in here. They're out there.
They put an ignition interlock in your car for 1 year.
Car won't start unless you blow into it.
It's embarrassing.
You gotta pay fees, get a lawyer.
Need to see my probation officer for testing all the time.
Have to pick up garbage.
It literally consumes your life.
I lost my family's trust.
Lost my job.
I lost my marriage.
I lost my kids.
Lost a lot of time, you know? A DWI is just a big waste of time.
Leave me alone.
When a child shares hurtful comments online, that's bullying. Visit erasebullying.ca to learn how to help your child stand up to cyberbullying.
I just remembered it's election day. Are you going to vote?
I don't know. I don't think I'll have time today.
Millions of eligible voters in America never make it to the polls or even register to vote. When you don't vote, you're letting other people make decisions for you and pick the things your taxes will pay for. Voting is more than a civic duty. It gives you a voice about the priorities and the future of your community and our nation. Voting gives you a seat at the table.
You're listening to Straight No Chaser. So let's get back to your girl Aunt BZ, Pastor C, and the Chief.
President Trump let loose with a series of tweets attacking the process. The president zeroing in on the accuser by name, saying if the attack on Dr. Ford was as bad as she says, charges would have been filed with local authorities by either her or her, quote, loving parents, adding, why didn't someone call the FBI 36 years ago?
Welcome back. You just heard a report by WBZ Television describing the president's tweets expressing his skepticism about Dr. Ford's allegations. Now, we've been talking about the explosion of sexual assault allegations against high-profile people. These accusations have delayed the Supreme Court nomination process and put America's father in prison. Now, there are those who do not believe the accuser when it comes to this Supreme Court nomination incident or nominee incident, but want the appearance of a fair process. Recently, it was reported that one reason the confirmation vote will proceed is due to the stress on KAVANAUGH and his family. But